All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our monthly webinar. My name is Claudia, and I will be your host today. This month's topic is following the theme of the month across the board, which is men's health awareness. And for that very reason, we have invited three individuals from three different walks of life, but all three of them have found a passion in health and wellness and understanding human health and optimizing it, and not only through their own journeys, but in order to help others find their own way. Now, before we jump in introducing each of them, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping, which is we have the chat window open on the right-hand side of the Zoom window. So please feel free to chime in. Let us know where you're tuning in from. If you have any questions, feel free to pop it in either that window, or we also have the Q&A window at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. Now, we will address the questions either as we are going through the conversation or toward the end. It depends on how these questions come in. All right, so today's discussion around men's health is relevant because there's a change in how men view their own health and how they take care of it. And it's changing both physically and mentally in how they are approaching their individual health and how they are working on personalizing it. So let me introduce you to our guest, and we'll jump right into the questions. So first, we've got Cameron Ewan. He is a doctor of physical therapy and certified strength and conditioning specialist. He's also the director of rehabilitation and training at Bespoke Treatments in New York City. In his practice, Cameron helps clients rehabilitate from injury while fostering health behaviors, nutrition, and exercise practices. And he's also a regular contributor to major publications and brands, including Men's Health, GQ, Nike, Rowan, and Livestrong. And moving on, we've got William Flood. He is a fourth-year neuroscience PhD candidate and second-year MBA student at Wake Forest University. He's also a former college athlete. And he began pursuing neuroscience as an undergraduate. And it all came from a personal experience. He was curious about what was happening to him personally after receiving repetitive head impacts on a consistent basis. And I will let him dive into that experience a little bit more and what he's found in his research and what he is working on right now, because it's pretty fascinating. And his research was eventually published, and he decided to continue this investigation into graduate school. And then last but not least, we've got Wyatt Ewing. He is the founder and CEO of iceBarrel, and he's got his expertise in product innovation, manufacturing, and e-commerce marketing. But what's interesting that before he founded iceBarrel, he worked in a completely different industry. He worked in corporate aviation, and that means buying and selling jets. You would think that's a fascinating career, but like so many, he bought into that fiction of our society that you got to work harder, sleep less, and don't complain in order to succeed, except that 60 to 80-hour work week really took a toll on him and eventually caught up with his physical and mental well-being. And also, again, I want to have Wyatt tell the story, but throughout his journey, he was introduced to cold therapy, and that cold therapy exposure was something that opened his eyes to cold thermogenesis and how it impacts physical and mental health. So he set out on a mission to create the most accessible and effective cold therapy solution, really helping everybody everywhere to get colder and feel better along the way. So he is the founder of iceBarrel, and I will tell you guys more about it as we go along, because we have an interesting collaboration with that brand on our social media on Instagram. All right, let me dive into some of the first questions, which I want to run by something that I found across the board when I was researching men's health. There was a new survey that came out that men are less likely to feel the need for regular preventative health checkups. And 38% of those respondents really took to social media for medical advice. And almost 2/3 of them who were polled feel they're naturally healthier than most people. And these are some of the numbers that we find when it comes to men's health. And I'd like to ask each of you, about your personal experience with this matter, and especially prevention in general. Do you guys go to your annual checkups every year on a consistent basis, or do you tend to wait until something concerning shows up in your life? Cameron, I'm curious about your personal experience, and then also what have you seen in your clients, and how are they willing to prioritize their recovery, as opposed to what many people kind of feel as the old saying, go hard or go home?
Yeah, thanks so much for the intro, Claudia. So I would say I am pretty good about being proactive with my own physical health. I'll say to start with, my physical health, far from perfect, and this definitely hasn't always been the case. But yeah, I see my primary care physician regularly. I have a good working relationship with him. I see my dentist regularly. I recommend tracking. I do all the same tracking that I recommend all of my clients do. So these are things like getting your regular blood panels done, your fasted glucose levels. These are really important. I also have them, and I keep up with my body composition, my resting heart rate. So in a lot of ways, I am proactive with my own health. But when I was younger, I definitely had the go hard, go home mentality, go hard or go home mentality. I think we all did when we were younger men. And I still, to this day, I will put off seeing a specialist at times, and I definitely have neglected my own mental health. That's something that I'm really hoping to explore in the next quarter, is diving in and making sure that I'm taking care of my mental side just as much as my physical side, because that is extremely important. So yeah, I would say overall, I'm proactive with my health care. There are some gaps there, physically and definitely mentally. And then, yeah, when it comes to my own clients, it's a bit mixed with the men, because I do have some people that they specifically reach out to me to improve their health, or they'll come to us because our model looks at men kind of a little bit more comprehensively. But on the other hand, I do have men who come in and they definitely are injured, maybe because of that old school mentality where it's 100% training and just burning the candle at both ends, and they're not focusing on their health and recovery. But yeah, so either way, I would say I am trying to transition them towards kind of looking at training and recovery a little bit differently. But I would say, overall, throughout the pandemic and as we kind of emerge through it, men have definitely been looking at maybe their performance metrics a little bit less, or at least looking at their health metrics on kind of equal footing, their recovery metrics on equal footing. So yeah, now I see clients who, without even me intervening, they'll check things regularly, like the resting heart rate, which is fantastic, at a minimum. And it's not a big push for me to have them approach their training and their recovery a little bit differently. They're more interested in listening to their body a little bit more and responding appropriately, understanding how total stress influences their health. And so I would say, yeah, to kick us off on a positive note, I definitely see men who are trending more towards taking care of their health, being a little bit more proactive. And then, on the other side of that, getting away from the physical, because I deal so much with men's just physical health. I do see a lot of clients now who are very open with me about seeing a mental health professional, whether it's a therapist or a psychiatrist. They're very open to understanding and talking about the fact that they see these practitioners, which is, I would say, a huge shift. So overall, very positive changes, that men are taking a little bit better care of themselves, recognizing some of the big killers of men on both the physical and the mental side. So yeah, I would say overall, yeah, men are kind of waking up to this.
That's a fantastic point, and a wonderful segue to my question to you, Wyatt, because I'd like to talk to you about, you were kind enough to let us know in advance that you would be comfortable speaking about your experience when it comes to seeking out therapy. And it's a very important topic to cover at this moment, because it's gaining momentum across the board, how there there used to be this stigma around men seeking out therapy, showing weakness and lack of strength and all those other things that are so not true. And now it's one of my friends told me that if you have friends who are men and they have not sought out therapy, then they are missing something incredible from their life. So, and of course, the numbers are still kind of strange. According to the WHO, the World Health Organization, it says that 1 in 20 men will seek help, but it's 1 in 10 who actually have depression. So Wyatt, walk us through your experience with mental health changes and therapy, and then what was the nudge that gave you that push to, okay, I'm gonna dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I'm excited to dive in. Yeah, so my journey, I guess, into therapy, it kind of, gosh, it's been a few years now. But I struggled with like anxiety and depression growing up. A lot of your beliefs and outlooks on life, psychology has shown that you kind of form those in your formative years around the age of 7, is kind of like that tipping point. So there's a lot of life that happens between infancy and the age of 7. And that's where a lot of like symptoms of anxiety and depression like really start to bloom. And yeah, I struggled. I struggled with things internally in regard to like perfectionism. And I got to this point in my life as an adult where it quit serving me, like these unhealthy like defense mechanisms. Like it wouldn't matter like how safe I felt or how safe I was, like if that like inner child wasn't perceiving that, it just became like destructive in regard to my work routines, my relationships, the way that I communicated. And there was just a point in my life where I realized that this idea of like I just have to do better, I'll just like tough it out, I'll just work harder to like suppress or hide certain sides of myself, it was just becoming like destructive. And I was just struggling with intense anxiety and depression through that. Now, again, I think this like notion that like tough it out is like bad isn't true. I don't think we should like reject that primal aggression within us. I just think that we need to learn how to harness and better handle and manage stress in the 21st century. We're inundated by so much, and we're told to do all these different things, and we get advertised to, and we consume so much media. And so I think we're just like overwhelmed and we don't realize it. So again, I don't say like the tough it out method is bad. I think there's a place for that, but I also think there's time to stop, think, slow down, become aware and present. So it was at that time in my life where I knew I needed help. I knew I couldn't like do it on my own. And I had the amazing support of my wife through all of that time. My anxiety and depression really stemmed from a need to survive. I had a very unconventional upbringing, and I was raised in a very a very intense environment where survival was necessary. And I never like, as I aged, I never really grew out of that. And so, yeah, it took a lot of years, and a lot of different types of therapy as well. Like there's like talk therapy, there's EDMR therapy, and a bunch of other modalities, but I did like a plethora of them. And I found tremendous progress with it as well. And a lot of these traits that you develop as a child, in my case, they definitely like went away, stayed away. And I think with like consistent, I don't know, there was a lot of consistency in my routine when it came to therapy, and also in the practices of mindfulness, of meditation, cold therapy, like those types of biohacks. I don't like that word, but those types of things can really support you on that journey as well.
That is really interesting. And later on this discussion, I'd like to go into how cold therapy, what your experience is with cold therapy and the mental aspect of that, because a lot has to do with, just surrendering and all those things when it comes to extreme cold. Now, did you have any aha moments, anything that was like a realization throughout therapy that would tell you that helped you connect the dots? Oh, I was doing this because of this, and I should change this and try to, rewire your neurological pathways in one way to really become more aware and present.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think we all have a desire. Again, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do think that we have to understand it. But we have a desire to be in control, and I think the realization that I'm like so wildly not in control of life and my surroundings, and you can be at peace and be safe, right? In those, in the lack of control was a big aha moment for me. And I also think that like reconditioning the mind, which I did through cold therapy, where right you submerge your body in freezing cold water and the fight or flight response kicks in, and you're telling your body, even subconsciously, that you're safe and that like this is what real stress feels like. So when you get out of the ice barrel or whatever cold therapy receptacle you're using, you've just reconditioned your mind. Stress is like there's the type of stress which is good for you, right? Where that would be like cold therapy, working out, those are good stressors. But then you also have like negative stressors where like somebody flips you off in traffic. That should not evoke a stress response. Right. So you got to recondition that mind. And so I use cold therapy, meditation, breath exercises, and exercise to do that. And that put me in a state where I don't have to be in control, but I can still be safe. I can still be okay and at peace. So that was like one of the big aha moments for me. I would also say, just in regard to like relationally, like we don't have to like recreate the same traumas, challenges that happened to us. We don't have to recreate that in like the next generation. So how we relate to people and how we interact with people, like there is a level of awareness that we can get to where we do it healthily. And a lot of that has to do with like, walking through like forgiveness and trust, and you're not going to go through life and not have challenges. So learning how to like repair the damage that gets done is more important than trying to avoid it.
That is an excellent point. I love how you address that. If somebody out there is watching, or somebody they know is on the verge of going to therapy, or maybe just kind of trying to solve it on their own, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think like just like my personality, I'm kind of an all or nothing type of person. So I always jump in with both feet, even if I don't know what I'm jumping into. But I know that not everybody is like that, and that's okay. But I would just encourage people like you have one life and it is a long life, and not to compare yourself to those around you, but like compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And if you can focus on just making 1% improvements day after day, like you're gonna get there. And it's okay to be stuck. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to be a man and to have challenges. It's okay, right? We don't have to like suppress our weaknesses, but we can be vocal about them. We can share them, and in that they can become our strengths.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Wyatt. I appreciate you sharing. I really do. And then I want to move over to William. I am curious about your experience with head trauma. In your bio, I talked about you having repetitive head traumas, which was really got you into researching this injury in the first place. So tell me a little bit about how did it happen? How did you know it had an impact on your life? And how have you recovered, or have you?
So yeah, I was a former college athlete. I played football in Georgia. Where basically it's not really a sport, it's kind of a religion. I was fortunate enough to go and play in college, Davidson College, and transferred to Walk-On at Wake Forest. Wonderful experience. I'm forever thankful for it. But during the time when I was playing football was around, it was temporally similar to when there was the debate with Junior Seau. The NFL was going through a lot of discussions, and there was a lot of basically conversation around the nature of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. It's a debilitating neurodegenerative disease as it relates to repetitive head trauma. And selfishly, I entered grad school wondering, oh my God, am I going to be one of those individuals that gets it? Because I was playing defensive line, playing fullback positions that are prone to repetitive head trauma, and really, I could tell just, and this is anecdata, this is just my personal experience, but it has been shown well in the literature that this repetitive head trauma does have an impact, even in the absence of a concussion. I've had plenty of teammates and myself who've experienced a concussion, but even just the repetitive head trauma over time, I found, and I was pretty smart about how I scheduled my classes, but my performance in school, I could tell that I just necessarily wasn't performing up to par, even as I was like scheduling classes around my athletic schedule. But ultimately, I could tell that my irritability was just increasing, and that the repetitive head trauma day to day was causing some type of mental alterations to my affect over time. And so, really, I wanted to explore. I wanted to explore this as I was going into grad school. And one of the things that I think really alarmed me when I was still playing was the number of athletes, and myself included, who received a concussion. There wasn't necessarily a steadfast protocol to help us rehabilitate. I had plenty of teammates who were either put into a dark room and told essentially wait it out. Some who were told to do some type of schooling activities, but not really do too much. It started to hurt. It was a lot of feeling it out as you proceeded. And I had athletes and friends who recovered, and then I had some who didn't. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the ones that did recover, and I'm still able to function, and I'm performing well enough in school, taking on way too much of a workload. But ultimately, I'm still able to live the life that I'm hoping to live. But I had a number of teammates who essentially weren't able to do that. And so part of my driving purpose behind entering grad school, and part of the things I just wanted to know personally, was what is happening, what is occurring, but then also what can we do to intervene on this. And so that was really the underlying driving factors behind my entering grad school and then pursuing the research that I'm pursuing.
So what have you done, or have you done anything specific? I mean, you said you were one of the lucky ones. You did notice different signs of lack of focus and brain fog. Or do you still do anything on a daily basis, or consistently every now and then? What helps you really perform at an optimal level that your work requires?
So as some of the other individuals on the panel have mentioned, I am a big proponent of mental health and therapy. I personally ascribe to meditation. I'm a huge fan of it. I often find myself just stepping out of the room to find a brief moment where I can take 5 to 10 minutes and just recalibrate myself, because there's just a ton of things coming at me. I actually began that practice when I was in undergrad. I felt like it was really helpful as I was going through the process of dealing with the stress of working at a high academic level while also participating in Division I football. Ultimately, that led me to develop the pilot project that I'm running now. And it really was that meditation that I felt was a very huge component to me being able to not just survive, but thrive through that very challenging point in my career. Personally now, I'm still actively exercising. And as Cameron and Wyatt mentioned, I think that struggle is inherent and good. So I do like to have some type of challenges, like when it comes to whether it be jujitsu, whether it be weightlifting, Muay Thai. I like to have that sense of like insulated struggle that allows me to still feel like I am able to basically perform and overcome challenges. But there has to be an active sense of recovery that comes along with that. So for me personally, I have to take active measures to decompress and to find a sense of balance. So meditation and then just tracking as I eat and as I sleep have been a major component to me making sure that I'm able to function on a day-to-day basis.
Love that. And we'll go into a little bit a personal aspect of how what you're doing on a daily basis really, how it makes a difference in your life, whether it's a positive, negative difference, and whether you need to pivot in one direction or another. And I will also learn a little bit more about your research and how the things that you found, but we'll leave that to the second round of questions, because I have a poll that I would like to launch. So let me go ahead and do that. Earlier, I stated a study that showed how men tend to get their medical information from different places, including social media. So I'm really curious, where you guys listening in are getting your health information from. Is it a primary care physician? Is it a health coach? Is it Dr. Google, or is it social media? So just curious to see where many of you stand. So I'm going to let this poll run for a little bit. And while that does, and don't want to waste time, just going to pop into the second round of questions, which is going to be about understanding how really physical and mental performance are interlinked. So often we talk about if you're not feeling well physically, that probably will impact your mental performance. And also if you're having emotional trouble, that may also impact your physical performance. So there is a really strong connection between the two. So I'm going to turn to Wyatt, to you first, because I would love to know, what have you found to be efficacious in optimizing your mental health, and how what you do physically have you learned makes a difference in your emotional well-being? What's the connection that you've been able to draw? And of course, I want to hear a little bit about your journey with ICE.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. The mind-body connection is so powerful and should not be neglected. I think sometimes probably even like more heavily back in like I would say like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was this like more common thought that the mind and the body are different, but they're not. And they're so interlinked, and they communicate to each other. And we really do train our bodies through our mind and our minds through our bodies. And they play off each other really uniquely. So how we discipline our bodies heavily affects our minds, and how we discipline our minds heavily affect our bodies. So it's really important that we're taking the time. We say this before I say that, I guess in our company, we always say like rest and recovery are equally as important as like hard work and, grinding, right? And so it's so important that we take the time to sit, to become mindful, and to do the practices like meditation, cold therapy, and breath work that calm the mind. And when you do those things, you're really like doing them with the body, right? It's like a physical, it's something physically that's happening, and it affects the mind. And then vice versa, right? When you're training the body, you're battling up in here, you're battling your mind, right? Doing the reps, running however long you're running, like continually pushing yourself. And when your body wants to stop, like you put your mind in check, and who's in charge, right? Who's in charge of the body? The mind is. And so my journey into ICE is, I was at this low point in life, and somebody encouraged me to take a cold shower. And like you hear like these stories where people like they didn't know how sick they were till they felt good. Like that's how I was. Like I didn't realize how like anxious I was till I started not feeling anxious. And the cold for like 5 to 6 months, I just sat on the shower pan floor in a cold shower. And I got to the point where I could just sit in there for 15 minutes. It wouldn't even be thinking anything of it, but it quieted my mind down. I would get amazing endorphin reliefs and rushes. It soothed like the anxious feelings inside. It improved my mood and my energy levels. And so I just like found something that like really worked where a lot of other health modalities didn't. And then I turned to the family bathtub to try and get a deeper submersive effect. But there were so many challenges with that. The position's uncomfortable. It's hard to it's not sustainable. You have to dump the water every time. The kids want to throw their toys in there, right? So I was went on a mission to figure out how can I take the best ice bath? What position is that for my body? What time of day is that? What temperature is that? Where do I want to practice it? How do I set my environment up to make it accessible and effective? And that's what I went out and did. And then turned out other people wanted that information and those products. So that's how Ice Barrel was born. But it was also, it was also interesting because as I went deeper into the cold therapy experience, I walked away from my career completely. And I was I'm going to share the power of cold with everybody everywhere. And so it gave me this courage and this mental strength that I had lacked previously. So I think that's what's interlinked. A lot of people ask me what are my other, whenever I do an Instagram live, everybody wants to know what are my other practices in the day that really help. And breath work is huge, even if it's taping my mouth shut. So I just breathe through my nose, getting up and watching the sunrise, sunset, those types of practices are very meaningful to me, and they help me train my body through my mind and my mind through my body.
That's such an interesting journey. I want to know, how do you feel after you get out of the ice? You mentioned endorphin, but what is it like, and how long do you usually stay in there for?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the temperature, but I like to take my ice baths around 45 degrees and for 3 to 5 minutes, unless my body is really broken from training, then I will go longer. There is a huge endorphin rush that comes after an ice bath. I will say though, you do build up a tolerance to the cold. So in order to hit that endorphin rush, like you have to stay consistent. And I also like to contrast that with sauna or like a warm bath, because that contrast therapy is really good as well. And that also increases the endorphin rush. But you feel invigorated. I've helped probably thousands of people at this point take ice baths, and I have never seen anyone get out of an ice bath without at least a smirk on their face. Everybody's laughing, giggling, at least they're smiling at the very least. So yeah, it's exhilarating. You feel incredible. It's like, if that's the hardest part of your day, because you're reconditioning your mind to what hard is and what stress is, if 5 minutes and 44 degrees 50-degree water is the hardest part of your day, like you've won the rest of the day.
That's awesome. And I mean, I can attest to that. I have, when I first got introduced to cold therapy a couple of years ago, I never thought I could sit in an ice cold water for let alone a second. And yeah, I worked my way up to 4 minutes, and it feels so good. And it's just something that it's hard to explain, but people need to try in order to really experience the benefits of it. And something I noticed, I don't know if it's the same to you, it helps you, especially you talked about control before, it helps you understand what it's like to let go of control, because that in sitting in that ice is where you have no control over your body. At least at the beginning, you really need to kind of surrender.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a key word. I don't use it enough. But the ability to like surrender to your surroundings is a very liberating thing, but it's probably also like one of the hardest things to do, because it doesn't, like, to the subconscious, it doesn't feel safe to do. So it takes practice. It takes consistency. And if you can surround yourself with people that you feel safe with, you can grow in that surrender, letting go of control a lot faster than you can if you're trying to do it alone. So there's definitely strength in community, strength in tight relationships. Yeah, it's a very ice baths, even for the first time you're doing them, they're very vulnerable experiences.
Yeah. Okay. We had a question come up from an anonymous attendee, and the person is wondering, what is the best way to contrast sauna and an ice bath? Do you do one in the morning and one at night, same day, or switch every day? And I think this is for you, Wyatt. So I'm just going to let you answer it. I thought I'd bring it up. It fit relevantly to this time of the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're doing contrast therapy, there's a couple different ways to think about it. When you're utilizing a sauna, though, your heart rate will rise while you're in a sauna. You're going to get really hot, and your body's going to start trying to cool itself. So, right, you're sweating like crazy, and your veins are like really plump, and there's a ton of blood flow. When you then go into the ice, it's called vasoconstriction. You're going to constrict your veins like crazy. And again, it's a crazy endorphin rush in sensation on the body. But you're like flushing your system, and you're resetting your hormones in the body. And it's generally when you're doing contrast therapy, it's best to do it like towards the end of the day, because you build up, like in your muscles, you build up lactic acid through the day. And so it's like a system flush, and it's very therapeutic and relaxing. So for me personally, I prefer to do it at the end of the day. I've already had my workout in. I've already, rolled around and crawled on the ground with the kids. So I'm pretty tired, beat up. And so I prefer to do it at the end of the day.
And when you do it at the end of the day, you spend 3 to 5 minutes in the ice and then go into the sauna, or the other way around. And how much time do you spend in the sauna?
Yeah, so when I'm doing contrast therapy, I like to start hot and finish cold. So 20 minutes in the sauna, 3 to 5 minutes in the ice, and then do another round of that. Ideally, if you have the time, up to 3 rounds. So 3 20-minute rounds in the sauna, and then 3 to 5 minute rounds in the ice, ending on cold.
Okay, cool. Well, I hope that answers your question. And let me move on to William. I want to dive into science a little bit of what we talked about earlier. Continuing on the topic to connect mental and physical performance, I'm curious to know what you have found in your research when it comes to head trauma. I know you cannot reveal too much just yet, but I've looked into some of the research in the meantime, and research has really kind of shed light on how neuropathological changes may occur with this injury. And there's a direct impact to the autonomic nervous system. And I believe you are looking at metrics like heart rate variability, which is a fantastic metric and that to kind of quantify physiological impact in a non-invasive way. So what have you found in your research, and what are some of the things that you're suspecting with your ongoing research, if you can reveal some of that?
So like you said, I'm still collecting and analyzing a lot of the data, but from what we've gotten now, we are seeing what is pretty consistent with what we've been looking at before with our earlier studies, that there are changes to neural correlates of the autonomic nervous system. And so autonomic nervous system really is that balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And I really think that it applies holistically across the board with this discussion, because it very much so is a very important aspect of our mental health. And just to bluntly put it, like you think of the sympathetic nervous system as that fight or flight response, parasympathetic nervous system as that rest and digest, and it really is the undulation, that the balance between the two that is that regulation has to be very well controlled, so that we can have our normal proceedings throughout the day and keep that homeostatic processing as functionally as possible. And so we find that in the event of a concussion or a head trauma, we find that there's a lot of disruption to the autonomic nervous system. And that makes sense, because like when you see someone, or if you've experienced a concussion, there's things like headache, photophobia. You see that there's irritability, too much, too little sleep. And we can see that there's ultimately that there are these autonomic changes that are occurring. And so what's nice, like you said, heart rate variability is a very insightful biomarker to be able to elucidate changes in the autonomic nervous system. Mm-hmm. So what we've done is, what we're trying to do currently at this point, and I'm still analyzing the data. And so what we're looking at really is coupling heart rate variability along with changes in cerebrovascular reactivity. So I was working with a cohort of athletes who, some played football, some who didn't, none of which received a concussion over the course of the season we were analyzing. And so just to preliminarily give some background, some changes, we're seeing that the athletes who did receive head trauma, they have changes in areas that are heavily related to autonomic functioning, such as the insular cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, and the medial prefrontal cortex. And so these are areas that are ascribed to a non-canonical network called the central autonomic network. And these regions are heavily important for regulating our heart rate variability. And so the current hypothesis that we are, that I'm really running with for my thesis, is that this repetitive head trauma, even in the absence of a concussion, has the ability to disturb autonomic functioning. And we've seen that in previous literature that there's alterations, there's hyperconnectivity or hyperactivity in these regions as a compensatory mechanism. Specifically within our lab, we noticed that there's changes in the default mode network. And so with these changes, it's possible that we may or may not necessarily see changes in heart rate variability, but there might be a compensatory mechanism from this top-down control needed in order to manage and regulate our autonomic state. And what's really nice about heart rate variability is that it's bigger than just the balance. It's the kind of crude way to put it, because it involves so many aspects, such as like reflex sensitivity, breath rate, as well as changes in hormones and hormonal function. So a little bit of the endocrine activity as well. And so it is a really insightful biomarker, but it's coupled and it needs to be really examined in a more holistic sense with other modalities as well. Mm-hmm. So just to really answer the question you're saying, we're seeing changes in these autonomic regions. Now, are they going to be eliciting major changes to someone's mood or affect immediately? Possibly not, but there is the potential for an accumulating effect of year after year after year of repetitive head trauma that could lead to these downstream changes and long-term changes that could ultimately impact and predispose someone to being diagnosed with CTE.
Okay, which is Sorry.
Oh,
I'm just making
chronic
sure.
traumatic encephalopathy. It's a neurodegenerative disease. It is the boogeyman in every male or female included. Any athlete who participates in any collision sport, it's a pathology that's similar to Alzheimer's. You see tau and these tau accumulation, and ultimately it has intense changes in mood and high irritability, inability to focus, sleep. It's just a major dysregulation. And so really it is potentially it's the biggest fear that every football player, boxer, collision sport athlete has at the end of their career. You might not see the changes when they're initially playing or initially during their time as an athlete, but 10, 15, 20 years on the line, you might start to see the symptoms because of this repetitive head trauma and the accumulation of these impacts.
And do you think potentially the symptoms that show themselves as an individual can notice them, do you think those are preceded with changes in HRV? So you would see significant deviation from baseline in their HRV before even they become symptomatic.
So that's really what we're looking for now. I will let you know soon. But we are examining these short-term changes to see if there's a potential long-term accumulative effect. And really what would be necessary, I think what's going to be the next stage in this research is looking at not just what happens over the course of the season, but the recovery aspect afterward. I believe, and this is my own personal belief beyond just like what the research says and like what I think where sports eventually should be heading is looking at active recovery, not just for individuals who are concussed, but even individuals who receive head trauma over the course of just the season and don't receive a concussion. There needs to be a way of tracking and monitoring athlete recovery and looking at them not just in season, but out of season as well to ensure that they're able to function into the coming season or into whatever other endeavors they're going into. And so I think that it's really important that we have a metric that's able, not just a single metric, but like it gives some insight as to the potential changes and basically being able to manage and maintain and track this recovery over time.
Okay. All right. Well, I really appreciate you sharing some of that details about the research, and excellent segue into my next question to Cameron, because I want to dive into a little bit of the various data that you guys use to quantify your clients' behavior and how to maximize their human performance, really. And how do you take a data-driven approach to helping them overcome or rehabilitate from an injury?
Yeah, so just like Wyatt and William mentioned earlier, it very much is this balance between training hard enough that you do get an adaptation, you do kind of work some of these demons out, as kind of Wyatt was alluding to with the mental and the physical, but there does have to be this equal balance between the two. So it is nice because we have so much technology these days to get really precise with our metrics and our battery of tests. But what we can also do is we can use that precision and we can create, field tests and batteries that, we can essentially have like a low tech, high tech version. So clients who might not be able to participate in these, they can still get almost the same effect to track their own performance. And for really personalizing their own training and recovery parameters. So big 4 areas I look at with clients. I'm looking at limitations in their movement system, and I can get really precise with measurement through there. And then the second one that's going to really navigate their training in terms of personalization is going to be looking at their energy system limitations. And then on the other side, getting into some of their behaviors and lifestyle limitations. The big one I'm going to be looking at is looking at their sleep quantity and quality. That's really where BioStrap comes in, as well as their nutrition. So those 4 main kind of pillars really inform an entirely personalized approach. So with movement limitations, I can get really precise with using dynamometry, which is essentially just measuring force output, how much torque they can produce at an individual joint. This lets me know exactly where limitations might be in muscular force. So are they overloading certain areas? Are they underloading certain areas? I can use force plates and 3D motion capture to see exactly how are these muscles firing together to coordinate these kind of gross movement patterns, and see, are they having limitations in their ability to kind of put these muscles together and doing kind of really functional foundational movements like squatting, reaching up overhead, hinging. These are kind of the big ones that I can, before were more subjective, and now I can really get precise with quantifying how they're moving and where those limitations are in their movement. And so I have this kind of high-tech option. And then, if I'm working with someone, or even someone who's just participating in this webinar, what they can do is they can essentially just Google functional movement screens, and they can kind of take their body through some of these movements. It's not going to be precise, but it gives a really good estimate how well your movement system is working. So you can start getting a little bit more personalized in what movement patterns you might need to work on, or what muscles you might need to work on. So, I can have someone coming in with the exact same diagnosis, but their actual training prescription surrounding their muscle force or their movements might be completely different because they have different limiters.
Mhm.
And then the other big piece when it comes to personalizing a guy's training program is going to be looking at their energy system. So how well can they take air in through their respiratory system and deliver that oxygen into their blood? How well can their cardiovascular system take that blood, take those nutrients, and deliver it and perfuse those muscles or other areas that might need to be working more? So we can actually capture, do they have a delivery limitation? Is that a delivery limitation even cognitively because of how they might hyperventilate or hypoventilate during certain tests? And then we can actually look at getting into their metabolic system. How well can they take that nutrition from the blood into their muscles and actually utilize it to create energy? So I can get really precise in their energy system training as well. And then same thing, I can do all that through gas exchange, through VO2 max testing, but there's field tests that correlate really strongly with this that guys can do. So you can just Google a ventilatory threshold test. That'll kind of give you your lower end aerobic training for energy system development, or you can look up something called like your lactate threshold run. It's a 30-minute run that correlates pretty strongly with this other threshold that you can work with. And so just with those two alone, I can prescribe so much individualized programming for their training. And then, when it comes to the recovery side and making sure we're tracking lifestyle, the biggest one that has been helpful in quantifying has definitely been sleep quantity and sleep quality. So we use a BioStrap, but again, if you're looking for a low-tech option, simply checking your resting heart rate every morning is going to give a really good indicator of total system stress that's just accumulated, whether it's physical, emotional, mental. Our body doesn't just think of these compartments of stress. It really does look at cumulative stress. So simple things like checking your resting heart rate first thing in the morning is excellent if you don't have access to these wearables that are pretty ubiquitous now. But we like the BioStrap just because it keeps track of these stages of sleep, total sleep, quality of sleep, but it also has so many extra metrics. The fact that it also captures things like oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, all these things you're going to see change depending on total stress going into your system. And then the fourth way, really like to personalize it, comes down to nutrition. And I put that fourth just because, sleep is, you can get away with somewhat with a suboptimal diet, I'd say, but sleep is really going to catch up with you. And it's, William can attest to this. If you just look at cognitive changes later in life, especially when we look at neurodegenerative disease, the impact of sleep is just enormous. And that is coming more and more to the forefront, and it's great to see. But having a way of quantifying it is really important. So that's why I just put nutrition afterwards. But essentially what I can do to really personalize it with men is capture their RMR, their resting metabolic rate, through gas exchange as well. And then I can actually use templates through BioStrap kind of to align nutrition protocols that might align better with, if they're looking at improving more of their performance, or if they're looking at reducing systemic inflammation throughout their body, while also making sure that they're hitting the correct macros to progress them along the way. So yeah, those are the 4 main areas that I really try and personalize programs for men here. And really what I'm looking at is those big main killers of men. They're kind of the big 4, but on top of that, we talked a little about the mental health side. And that's something that I unfortunately can't help men with as much, but suicide is still in the top 10 of killers among men. Depression is extremely common. So it is great that, I can really help out a lot of these guys with the physical side of their health and their performance. Cardiovascular disease is obviously extremely big. The big cancers in men, it's going to be lung and colorectal. And then we also have, some of the metabolic syndromes, and I can really help men with a lot of these things. These are some of the lifestyle things, but the mental side of it and talking to a therapist and getting that squared away is something that I'm really happy to see that more men are engaged with, because that's something that's really out of my scope, and I do understand is a big driver of morbidity among men.
That is such a comprehensive and come back to circle around answer, because you mentioned so many important aspects that for the longest time were only available for high performing athletes and people who are, are career athletes who are actually working with trainers and tracking these metrics. Nowadays, all these different data are available for nearly anybody. You can do it, you can seek it out on your own and start monitoring your health on your own with a wearable, or you can work with a health coach, or you can work with a personal trainer like you guys, and who you can be that behind the scenes person who can help them tweak when something is working to keep doing that way, or tweak in a way that this is not bringing me the benefit that I was wanting. So perhaps I need to change something. And that is a super important segue into our last question. But before I do that, I want to say that it's really interesting that the overall studies that have come out around where people, especially men, get their health information, 1/3 of you answering the polls do get your information around health from Dr. Google. So I highly encourage for you to go to a little bit more of a professional level and go to your health coach or primary care physician, or somebody who, has the credentials to give you answers that are going to provide you clarity as opposed to confusion. So let me launch the second poll, which is super easy. We talked about wearables and data and monitoring objectively. So I'm curious to know, do you use any wearables? I'm not talking particularly BioStrap, but I'm just curious if you're using any wearable to monitor your health, be it sleep, tracking activity, anything like that. And while that's running, I'd like to hop over to the last question, and we're going to do a fire round, because it's going to be a 7-minute chat, because we're going to be coming up to the end of the conversation. And this is going to all 3 of you. I am curious to know, what have you found being an objective way to monitor your decisions when it comes to your overall health and performance? Are you using any wearable? Are you looking at particular biometrics, sleep? Do you do any subjective check-ins like journaling or personal reflections? So let me go around. We're going to start with Will today for this last question, and then we'll go to the other view. So Will, what do you use? Do you use anything?
I do use a wearable PPG detectable wrist strap monitor. BioStrap obviously is the one that I choose. It's great.
Okay, I was like, come on, you can name drop a little bit.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm a huge fan. I love the metrics that I get from it, and I think that, especially because I'm working in a clinical setting as a researcher, I'm partnering with the hospital. Spending my time with half of my dissertation committee's clinicians, I find that the doctors are really just investigators. Like, they need to have as much information and data as they can to prescribe and really just have insight into your health. And the best thing that an individual can do is to have an already understanding or a prerequisite baseline understanding of where they're lying personally and objectively with some type of metric or some type of insight into their own health. And so I find that using BioStrap, even as I'm talking to my own primary care physician, I'm seeing these, I'm seeing this. I personally have asthma. I noticed that, as we're getting into the allergy season, I'm noticing these changes. What do I do? Ultimately, being able to have that insight, while also being truly brutally honest with myself, because I do have the tendency to just tough it out and deal with things. That's something that, being able to step back and observe phenomena and respect the objectivity, or at least the reality of the sensations that I'm experiencing, and then being able to have insight to quantify them, wearing a device, obviously BioStrap is my choice, allows me to have a better sense of my health. And so that really is the underlying approach that I have to when I'm examining and really trying to take control of my health.
Have you ever woken up one day and had a plan that you're going to kick butt, and then you looked at your data and it told you you might want to take it easy? Do you?
Yes. Yeah. I have. There are plenty of days where it's like we're gonna squat the roof, and we're gonna go and lift. We're gonna kill it today. And I just didn't get enough sleep. I was in lab till like 2 a.m. I expected to come in and just crush my lifting goals, and then go to train Muay Thai. And it was just like, no, you cannot do that. You should not do this. You've been under incredible amounts of stress. And so instead, I'll take a walk around Salem Lake, the local spot here. I'll do something that'll be a little bit still physically active, allow me to still be able to just do something and be mobile, just be able to be and exist and keep moving. But I have to respect the boundaries of my health. And I think injury is the worst. Like the moment that you get injured, there's a physical but also a mental component of helplessness that comes with that. I've spent so much time with individuals like Cameron, and I'm just like, help me, please. And you talk about the fact that you're not really able to help mental health, but I think that really, Cameron, you and Wyatt, you as well, you're providing services that are so critical to someone's mental capacity. Just the sense of hope and the ability to do and be and physically exist to the full capacity that you want to is such an important aspect and cornerstone of our existence. And so ultimately, I think that being aware of your ability to recover so that you can continue for the long haul is so important. So yes, BioStrap has kept me in check throughout a lot of my
yeah, we like to pride ourselves for being the check engine light. Some people like to disregard sometimes. Okay, all right. Well, Cameron, coming to you. I mean, you have it behind you, live better, longer. That's exactly what Will was just talking about. So do you use any personally? I know you do this with your clients, but personally, do you have any ways of checking in with yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. All of us here, we try and, everyone on my team, we try and really kind of embody our ethos here. So yeah, I have, BioStrap. I use it every night. I use a few other metrics that I also recommend my clients do. So, I use the Garmin for all my exercise tracking as well. Just different sensors, obviously. And then, I mean, the big ones objectively for me that I really recommend that, also all my clients do, I give them kind of the high tech, the low tech versions, resting heart rate, or if you're doing a wearable, capturing HRV and all the other metrics that kind of come along with it. In terms of body composition, what I have a lot of men do is make sure that they're tracking their waist circumference. For me, I actually just track body composition, but it's easy to low-hanging fruit to just say, here's a tape measure. I just want you to check this regularly. That's a little bit more tightly correlated with visceral fat than it is, just checking like BMI, for example. And the other big one I regularly check is fasted blood glucose levels. So, pre-diabetes, it's almost 40% of our population has it, which is pretty amazing. So simple testing kit that you can get from CVS with testing strips is only $30. It's a small investment for the rest of your life. And, I often recommend also using continuous glucose monitors so you can see how your body responds to stress, how it responds to specific types of foods you're eating, combinations of different macronutrients, as well as exercise. Your body has a different blood sugar response to exercise. I'd be curious what it would look like with a cold plunge, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
definitely.
so there are these really simple ones that you can keep track of, that I keep track of. And there's kind of different tiers depending on how much of an investment you want to make, but it really can, to keep your health on track, can cost, under $35 a month. So there's really no excuse for keeping up with some of those objective ones. And then in terms of, just mental checks, again, like it is a big priority for me this next quarter to focus on mental health a little bit more. But I do a daily debrief every night. It really helps just kind of bring things back in focus, see things, kind of get out of the day-to-day and kind of see how everything fits in the bigger picture. So essentially just like an after action report that you might do with your team. I do a daily debrief myself, and it does just kind of help keep me grounded a little bit. And it's an essential practice mentally for me. So a few objective, and that's kind of my big subjective one that kind of helps me stay level.
That's a great list. Really good. And Wyatt, what have you got? Off the record, we talked a little bit about, not every day of yours goes as you want it to. How do you do your check-ins?
Yeah, so I kind of have a different approach, although I respect everybody else's approach. And I'd also like to say I am like a data nerd, and I love to track things and test. But I do think that like our culture is heavily based on like comfort and endless dopamine hits, and it's kind of left us like disconnected and definitely dysregulated physically. And I do think a return to some like basic principles would be really beneficial. So like when I say that, I like technology and like the wearable, I use a BioStrap as well. I like it to inform my instincts, right? And confirm what I'm already feeling and knowing. So I do take an objective approach, but I don't want technology to replace my instinct. And I think we can fall into that trap. So I do check-ins, and I do them throughout the day. Like I ask myself questions based on like, what's my stress level right now? And the more I do that, I'm able to gauge like where I'm at. I ask myself, like, what's my breath pattern like right now? Am I breathing calm through my nose, or am I in a panic state? Yeah, other health things like that are important, right? Do I have a high or do I have a low libido? Am I present in the moment? Yeah, and have I put in enough like physical activity for the day? And then I let my the technology that I'm utilizing, I let them start confirming and informing, what I'm guessing, what I'm feeling and sensing. And so that's the approach that I like to take.
That is great. That is such a wonderful roundup. And a lot of the things, I know we're talking about men's health, but it applies to women as well in so many ways. And a lot of our users have actually told us that before they look at their BioStrap morning sleep and recovery score, they try to kind of check in with themselves, like what it could be. And it's such an amazing thing when we start to tune into our intuition a little bit more, and that intuition pairs up with what the data shows. It doesn't always give you the validation you want, but you just need to take things with a grain of salt every now and then. Well, that's all we had time for today. I know we ran over a couple of minutes, but I just want to thank all three of you for taking the time and energy and really your expertise to share what you have been through, what you recommend and what you use, and what you found efficacious in this realm of physical and mental health. And for those of you who have tuned in live, thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance to ask a question, we will send out a post-webinar email to everybody. And if you're watching this as a recording, you're also more than welcome to drop us at BioStrap a question about men's health and how you can potentially personalize yours. So gentlemen, I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing all our attendees in our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.